Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the meeting. It's so good to see people in person again. We are being recorded. We are, Jesse? We're on? Okay, thank you so much. We are being recorded. I apologize. The deputy mayor and I had a meeting earlier, so we got started a few minutes late. I do apologize. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councilman Pecora?
Present.
Councilman Petrucci?
Present.
Councilman Getzey?
Present.
Deputy Mayor Sapp?
Present.
Mayor Calabrese?
Present.
And we'll just note that two counselors are joining us remotely, so they can hear us and so forth. So
Yeah, so for the record, Councilman Pecora and Councilman Petrucci are by way of telephone.
correct. At this time, we will open the floor to any public comment that you may have on any matter. But as it pertains to the stimulus proposal, if you have any comments about the stimulus in general, you can certainly make those now. I'm going to present the stimulus plan to the mayor and council and the public this evening. I expect there might be some dialogue. However, I do just want to let you know that after the plan is shared with you, and it's a good bit to take in and digest. So it isn't as though you have to have all of your comments tonight, because we're going to have more meetings as we go through the remainder of the year to change the plan, craft the plan, and to take your input. So if you leave the meeting this evening and you think of something later, that's okay, because nothing is carved in stone in terms of the stimulus. It's sort of just the beginning framework for where we are. So with that, I will open the public comment, and if you could please approach the podium and state your name and address.
I would like to add, if I might, that this is truly the very, very beginning stages. So not only do we welcome, but we absolutely encourage you to help craft this plan. We're opening this to the public. There will be many more meetings, and we really, truly do want input. So if you have an idea over the next few months, please come forward with it. You don't have to have an idea tonight, but as you think about it, please come forward. Thank you.
With that, if there is public comment, please approach the podium and state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Rev Ryan Manners, and I represent Bridging Rivers Community Alliance Church. I reside at 1551 Riverside Drive. That's a Verona, PA address. It's a Penn Hills municipality. And I am basically here on tonight. I submitted a proposal letter to be here and to be here next week to talk about taking the tenancy of the William McKinley Community Center. And that's basically why I'm here. So I'm thankful to have the opportunity to talk about that a little bit, share a little bit of vision, and I don't know whether you have any questions for me at this point.
I'm sorry, Reverend, you said you were going to come next week as well?
Yes, ma'am, if it's possible. I was planning to be here today and then also next week as well, if that's possible. But I'd be glad to share a little bit of the vision that I have for the community center. I'm, very thankful for the opportunity to share that.
So tonight is a non-voting meeting for the American Rescue Plan, but if you have comments related to that, certainly we welcome them.
Well, I don't have comments as it pertains to that, but if it should please you, I would love to have the opportunity to just share a few comments about my vision for the William McKinley Community Center.
Okay, sure. We typically have a three-minute limit for public comment.
Yeah, we usually do stick to a 3-minute time limit for input.
Okay. So basically, so we are a community of faith. We are a church under the Christian Missionary Alliance, and we are seeking to grow our community of faith by multiplying small groups around the community and public spaces. But as well as being a church, we also think of ourselves as a community development organization, and we really want to seek the betterment of the community in and around that area. I've lived on one side of the William McKinley Place. I formerly lived in Verona Borough for 15 years. Now we live on the Penn Hills side of the municipality, and the building and the community center actually sits right in kind of between where we live. So we know the community inside and out, and we would really love to use that to drive community development. You know, we really think that the gym that's there, that's available, the commercial kitchen, the ball field that's there is a way that we could drive community development to make it a better place, to do community meals, to partner with local fire halls, and all, you know, really the possibilities are endless of the different ways that we could use that facility to build community, to better the community. And we are basically willing to pay some rent for that community to use that space. Under, you know, a lease agreement that would be conditional kind of upon the current tenants that exist in that building. But we really see it as an opportunity to drive both facets of that agenda, you know, that we have to grow our community of faith as well as to build community. And so we would love to have the opportunity to share more about that. I don't know whether you have any questions for me at this point. But that's really how we see it as a great opportunity. You know, I know that the municipality for years has funneled some resources into maintaining those facilities. And we think that it's time that, you know, not only should the municipality receive a little bit of kickback from that for stewarding it so well, but also it should really be used, I mean, to effectively reach and to build and to better the community and the communities surrounding that area. So that's really what we hope to seek and to do and accomplish. And that's more or less why I wanted to just have the opportunity to share that with you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
How many people in your congregation?
Currently, we have about 30 people that are growing. And over the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, we were getting started and we were utilizing public spaces to meet in. And so that was one of the very limiting factors that we saw during the pandemic. And that's another reason that we're seeking now to find a space that we would have more sphere of control over, you know, bringing groups into and gathering people together.
Well, I'm happy to see you interested.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the comment.
Reverend, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So you talked a lot about community activities.
Yes.
Do you plan to hold church services in the building as well?
Yes, we do. Yep. Yeah, I mean, our vision for church and, you know, development of church is really to create, you know, non-intrusive, kind of non-traditional, easygoing, you know, formats of church out in the public space that people can really get at. And so, you know, in a non-threatening kind of way, you know, our vision is that there's a lot of people out there today that I don't think they're so much against church, but they're against some of the ways that it's been administered. And sometimes to them, a church building represents a space that they would not want to go into. And so we seek to tear down those barriers to allow people to come into a more neutral space, not only there, but also other spaces within the community that would complement that space, where they can, you know, find out and wrestle with questions of faith in a space where they will be respected and honored and feel comfortable and safe.
Okay. So would you be welcoming the community that the center is in? Would it be open to that community? And would you also be receptive to allowing the people who are already occupying that space to be there, or you plan to utilize the entire building?
Yes, ma'am. No, we would certainly intend to keep the tenants that would exist currently. That would help us to offset some of the, you know, the utilities and possibly the rent to the municipality. So we would certainly want to keep them and build relationship with them as well. You know, I mean, I see myself as a minister to the community, so I would certainly want to treat them with respect and get to know them and build relationship with them as well. And then as far as being open to the community, absolutely. I mean, we want to be a community center a place where people can come from the community and they can, kids can play ball, they can experience clinics for kids and athletics. We could use, the gym and the commercial kitchen to do community dinners, spaghetti dinners, fundraisers for local fire hall, local organizations, all kinds of different things. I mean, we would want it to be a place that was very welcoming, that people could come to. And whether or not they believe in the faith of Jesus Christ, they could still find it as a space that was comfortable and welcoming, and that they could find good community development there.
Okay, and my last question to you would be, what is your affiliation, if any, with the Christian Alliance Church on the north side?
Yes, ma'am. I was a former staff member there. I served there for 15 years. I also worked for Urban Impact Foundation for 10 years, which is a nonprofit ministry that grew out of Allegheny Center Alliance, and I am ordained under the Alliance. So I served there, and part of my time as working for Urban Impact Foundation, they see themselves as a community development organization, as well as, kind of a parachurch organization that would go hand in hand with the church. And so I got to see how the nonprofit, can go hand in hand with the church and really became a fuller expression of what I believe God intended for community to experience. So I served on staff there for a number of years. And then I also pastored Rock of Ages Alliance Church for 6 years, which is up in Cheswick, which is a little further up the river and across. So I've got, my background and experience. I've been in large church, I've been in small churches, and, a lot of what we do is community development, because we really think that as you serve the community and you bring good things to the community, that's a lot of the ways that it's almost a vehicle for people coming to faith and finding faith in Jesus Christ. So.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So Reverend, you left Cheswick and then started your own church.
Well, so we have a district executive committee that governs our district, which is the Western Pennsylvania district, that currently has 140 Christian Missionary Alliance churches in it. And so it was in cooperation with our district leadership that they allowed us to step back from that other church and to start this new church, and it would be under the governance of that district.
And so how long has this new church been in existence?
Well, we sometimes use the word plant for a new church like that. But we started it in the fall of 2019, and we were meeting in public spaces around the community there. And then, of course, when the pandemic came just a few months later, the public spaces were limited to us. And so we weren't able to use that. So it kind of limited us for a while. We did continue to meet in different capacities, where we were able to, but we saw that as a great limitation. And so that's another reason now that we're seeking a space that we would have a little more sphere of control over.
So it sounds as if you're dependent upon donations. Your church is dependent upon donations.
So we do have, so our district is behind us. So I do have a budget from which I work out of. The district has provided us with a budget to work with. But then, yes, we also, people tithe, people, give to support, and we have other people that contribute to the finances of that as well.
So on the revenue side, what is your monthly budget?
Well, our monthly budget right now is, we have about $3,000 to $4,000 available to us on a monthly basis. But, part of that is defined as we grow. Because as we have more people come in and contribute to the finances of the church, it grows there. And then also our district, as they see more and more fruit of our ministry, they will also continue to increase that number as well. We have a budget set aside for what we call church planting in the district of $1.5 million.
May I ask why you left Cheswick?
Mainly because we've lived in over the last 22 years, I've lived in Oakmont, I've lived in Verona Borough, and now I live in Verona, but it's the municipality of Penn Hills. And so our heart has always been there. And while I have ministered at other parts of the city over a number of years, it's always been our desire to really fully invest into the community in which we live. We believe that is a biblical principle to be incarnational. to be fully investing in the community in which you live. And we believe it's the best way to reach people. And so when we were given the opportunity by the district to step back from the other church and to focus our efforts on the community in which we live, we jumped at the opportunity and we were very thankful for it. So we just didn't know that a pandemic was coming a few months later.
So that's your full-time job then, pastoring this church?
Yes, ma'am.
And so does your income and the income of the staff come out of that $3,000 budget?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, right now, I'm kind of the only full-time staff, if you will. I've got some other people that help with some of the responsibilities, and I, give them stipends and I pay them kind of part-time kind of things. But I also receive an amount from the district, which solely goes to me to fund my family because I have a wife and 4 kids.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions or?
Reverend Manners. Can
Yes,
you hear
sir. Yes, sir.
So in my understanding, and I just want to make this clarify because I think I know where everybody's going up on the panel. Your district is behind you 110% and you can afford to rent for this facility. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes, I've already talked it over with my district executive committee for the district, and they're behind me not only for the church efforts that we are already invested in, but also for helping us to fund this. So yes, they are behind us.
So you can afford the monthly rent. All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Faith Milazzo, 121 Castle Drive. I know you're going to present this, so will we get a chance after you present it to make comments? Because I don't know that I want to make a comment now when maybe things that I've asked for before are in this. And I did look before I came. I went to the website. I searched on the word stimulus and I clicked on the Savvy Citizen event. And then I went to the main page. So I did try to do my due diligence and look for this, but.
There is a comment period for the mayor and council at the end. I suspect there might be some public comment. I think it's probably going to be to everyone's advantage if you take what we present tonight and have time to digest it. We're going to have multiple meetings between now and the end of the year before any proposal is adopted or finalized.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because I don't think it makes sense for anyone to speak now because we don't know what's in there. So I was just wondering if we get time at the end or just a different day.
And we also take comment by email as well.
Okay,
too.
all right, thanks.
My question's for Scott. That is your presentation tonight on the stimulus funds or the capital program or both?
It's on the stimulus. This presentation tonight is on how we propose to use stimulus funds in 2021 and 22.
Is there a document? Will there be a document?
You're about to get it.
Will we be able to access it?
Yes, after tonight, the presentation will be online, as will this recording. And the stimulus ties to the capital plan and our other funds. But this is a presentation geared towards how myself and the staff propose to use stimulus funds in 21 and 22.
Is the capital program still on the 20th agenda?
The capital program has been advertised for consideration on the 20th.
So will that, I've looked at, I don't know if others have, but I looked at the capital program trying to find out what was stimulus, what wasn't. And the source of funding, as you know, is not there. Will it be there on the 20th?
The council and the mayor haven't approved the use of the stimulus on any level yet. I certainly suspect that some of the capital plan and some of what's in that capital plan will be stimulus funded, but they all go together. Our 2022 budget ties to our 2022. I'm sorry, I was answering your question. Go ahead.
Well, you could probably figure out where I'm coming from. How can you adopt the capital program and not adopt the stimulus plan at the same
We
time?
adopt a capital program because we have to.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
I'm sorry, do you want to answer your own question or I can? I'm sorry. Well, only one of us can talk at the same time, Howard.
I'm sorry, I won't interrupt anymore.
You're asking, why do we have to adopt a capital plan before we've adopted these other items? The capital plan is something that the charter says that we have to do. And then that plan, which we prepare, lays out all of the things that we know we're going to do in the next 5 years. But it's also subject to amendment. It's a little bit different than the stimulus because we only have so much time in which to spend our stimulus funds under the rules. So the things that are in that capital plan that are going to appear next week, many of those might be funded by sanitary sewer funds. Many of them might be funded by CDBG funds. Many of them might be funded by stimulus funds and grant funds. I don't want to say that the capital improvement plan is a wish list. I think that's what it was in the past. But that capital improvement plan is a document that shows all of our capital needs in the municipality, not just the ones that we can afford. It shows the ones that we can't afford as well. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it would make more sense if you could show us in the capital program on the 20th source of funding.
I think that's a good point.
Can you
I
show
think
us that? The charter actually requires that.
Yep. And I think that we do have sources of funds at the top of the capital program. I just looked at it today. There's a sources of fund section.
I'm sorry, I was going to interrupt again. Are you talking about the introductory paragraphs?
No. In the Excel spreadsheet itself, and I don't have it in front of me, there is a sources and uses of funds.
No, I don't think so.
You want me to pull it up? I think you're wrong,
Yeah,
Howard.
on the front page, it's Howard, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but on the front page, the top line actually says sources of funding. The very first, on the first page, the very top says sources of funding.
Do you want me to
Now, it
pull
may
up
not be as
details
much
to you?
funding as the projects require, but the sources of funding is there.
Now, let me give an example. You have a slip and slide for the recreation department. Is there anywhere that shows that's funded with stimulus money?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of it.
Is there anywhere in the document that shows where the source of funding for the slip and slide is?
I don't know specifically about that one item, but I know on the very first page of the capital plan, that was one of the changes that we made to the capital plan 2 years ago when Chris and I kind of rebuilt it, is that it does have sources of funds. Is it perfect? No, because the capital need is bigger than the funding.
Right.
The capital need is bigger than the funding. So the sources of funds is never going to match 100% with what the need is. But we still adopt a capital plan and we show all of the capital need. If you look at the capital plan, I think it shows that I think it's $45 million. I think the sewer department alone, I think, is asking for like $20 million. That isn't to say that we have all that money right now, but we do that plan so that everybody could see what the total amount of the need is, irrespective of whether the funding is there at that time to pay for it. Because it might be, just like this year, we were blessed, I think, to get $18 million. No one knew we were going to get it. The benefit of having that plan is that there was a document ready to go, ready to be funded when the money came.
My concern again is that you're showing the capital program, you're including the $18 million of stimulus funds in the capital program. I'm assuming so because it's a 5-year plan.
Some of
6
it.
years actually, including this year. But we have no idea what line items the stimulus money is going toward.
And that's the purpose of tonight.
Right.
The purpose of tonight's meeting is to show the public and the mayor and council the work that we've done as staff based on public input, based on the rules, based on what we feel the needs are, to say, here's a framework for how we expect the stimulus to get programmed in 2021 and then 22 when it ties into our budget later this year, and the capital plan as well. Although a lot of what's in that capital plan is equipment, and the stimulus really can't fund equipment so much. It's funding other services and expenses. It doesn't fund vehicles and so forth. That capital plan has vehicles and other equipment and things like that. Anything over a 5-year useful life is what's included with that plan.
Okay, bear with me with one more question. I'm not familiar with this council's procedures as far as the ones that I worked with in the past. Is tonight's meeting a public hearing?
This is not a public hearing.
Will there be a public hearing for stimulus funds?
As I have said probably 3 times tonight, there are going to be multiple meetings to hear from the public about the stimulus plan as well as our budget, of which this is a part. This stimulus plan and this stimulus funding is one part of our budget, that we cannot spend any funds, whether they're state, local, or federal, outside of a budget. So what we're showing tonight is how we expect this funding will be programmed into our budget this year and how we expect it's going to hit our budget next year. All of those things are predicated on public meetings later on this month, October, November, and December, as we put our budget together and all of these separate funds interact with one another.
How will you advertise the public hearings?
The public hearings, we're not required to have any public hearing for the use of the stimulus fund. We have a public hearing for the capital plan, and we have
And the
public
operating.
hearings that are required by law for the budget. Those get advertised in the newspaper. They also go on Citizen Savvy and Facebook, and he's raising his hand back there. So he puts them out so that people know. That's why people are here this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Before you go, I'd like to ask a question. That's part of the reason I love these non-voting meetings is because we have a give and take. At the voting meetings, it's typically just comment and we don't go back and forth. So I have a question, and I'm very serious. I don't mean this sarcastically. I truly mean this as a true question. So what? So what difference does it make what we call it? Because in my mind, I'll tell you how I view this, and maybe you can set me straight because this is new to all of us. So when I look at the budget, in my simple mind, I look at it like a household budget, right? In our everyday monthly budget, we absolutely have to budget for the electric bill and the gas bill and shoes for the kids, right? So maybe we have a long-term capital plan for the house, and the household budget, or it won't be the budget, it'll be our long-term plan, to make an analogy. Hey, would love to get a new TV, would love to get a new PlayStation and maybe living room furniture. Out of nowhere, Aunt Betty says, guess what? I have $200 to give to you, but I have there are strings attached. You can only use this for the children. So we say in our household budget, oh, great, the money that we now set aside for the kids' shoes, we're going to move that over and get a PlayStation because Aunt Betty won't approve of that, but she would approve for the shoes. So in my mind, we're just moving pots of money around. Am I wrong to look at it that way? So I ask because this is all going to be reflected in the budget. Do I view that incorrectly? Please correct me.
No, I just coming at it at a different angle. I look at the capital budget and I want to know whether it's coming out of the operating money, the sewer fund, the balance from 2021, or from COVID money. I'd like to take a look at eligibility on some of the projects that are proposed by this administration for COVID money, because I've been reading up on eligibility requirements under the interim final rule. And I've been trying to pay a lot of attention to that. And I look at a project and I wonder, well, where are they coming from in terms of COVID money? But I don't know that it's COVID money that they're planning to fund that project with. So I don't know what kind of questions to ask.
So like in my mind, some of this money probably, the sewer system may be eligible for some of that money, which means money that we would normally set aside for the sewer, we could move it into something else that is not eligible.
Well, even sewer funds are clearly eligible under COVID preliminary rules anyway. But it's questionable whether sewer COVID money can be used for sewer funds that are part of a consent decree or a mandate. So I don't know if the municipality is paying any attention to that or not.
Excuse me, one second. There's one thing that was just mentioned about sewer. I think we should leave that out of the equation with that, because I asked that question when this went down up at Seven Springs and Kathy was there with me. The money in the sewer fund cannot be transferred over to the general fund. That is a separate fund at all. Only thing we can do with that stimulus, from what they're telling me up in Seven Springs, is take the money and do the fixing of the lines that need done, put it back into our infrastructure, which would build probably the sewer fund up take the money, and build it up into the sewer fund. But we can't say we're going to take the money from the sewer fund and transfer it into the
No,
other.
you're right. I was just using that as an example. I wanted to use it as an example because I knew that those funds, maybe not because of the consent decree.
That's
but-
nothing that has nothing to do with what I was talking about. I agree with the
Right.
councilman that, the sewer fund is the sewer fund. You can't take money out of the sewer fund and put it in the operating budget.
Right.
I'm aware of that. But I'm not aware of where COVID money is going at this time. Now, if you say you're going to hear a presentation tonight and then hurry up maybe and adjust the capital program between now and next week, he's shaking his head, you're not going to do that.
No.
So we're going to come in next week and maybe there's evidently we're going to be able to see a document.
I think where you're getting confused, Howard, is that historically, and I think this is true of almost everywhere, and it's certainly been true of Penn Hills, not everything in that capital plan is funded. And that's why we have it. We ended up with.
I'm going to interrupt
Okay,
this
go ahead.
time because I am aware of that. And that's like one of the identifications in the capital program could be that it's not currently funded.
And I think.
And we have no way to tell that yet.
Well, and I think I think that what we have is a good document that's not perfect. And I think you would admit that if you look at the capital plan a few years ago compared to what it is now, I think we've become a lot more sophisticated.
I agree.
So that capital plan, it's showing projects. I don't want to say some of it's pie in the sky, but sometimes that is what happens with the capital plan. And it's showing these are all of the capital needs. If we had infinite money, this is what the need would be. And so in some cases, there are funding sources for it, and in some cases there aren't, but you never know when a funding source may show up. I had a conversation with our planning director early on when I told him we need to do a capital plan to show all of the capital needs in Penn Hills. But why would we do that? And you remember the discussion. Well, why would you do that? Because we don't have $45 million. We don't have $50 million, but you don't know when it could arrive. And case in point, this year it did arrive. We got $18 million. We were in a good situation because we already had a pretty good framework of a plan for what our needs were, that if we were to get funding, we didn't have to scramble around like a lot of communities did that didn't have a plan. So the fact that we had a plan that we could pull off the shelf, it might not be perfect. Some of it might have been pie in the sky. Some of it might not make the final cut. We were able to say, well, we have $18 million now. How can we plug that into some plans that already exist? And so to answer your question, how does the COVID money touch the capital plan? The COVID money has to get approved by the mayor and council for how it's spent in the first place. That capital plan, in some respects, is always going to be a wish list. And you work at it and you try to whittle it down and you try to make some plans to fund it as you go. That's how I look at it. Okay.
I appreciate what you and Chris have done with the capital program. I put together several capital programs, as you know. They were primarily ignored by the council and the public. They were called the wish list, yes. And I give you all the credit for putting it up in the form where people should take it more seriously. And particularly now, since we're getting $18 million. Before we would have a $5 million bond issue, we'd put the $5 million in year 2022 and describe 23 through 26 as wish list projects. I think the whole plan would be wonderful if you just include another column, source of funding.
And I think that's a good idea, and we could make it better. It's a working document. It's better this year than it was last year, and it was better last year than it was the year before. We're trying to make it better.
Particularly since
we have to move on.
The capital program is supposed to be a guideline for council when they adopt the capital budget, the annual capital budget.
I'm sorry, you repeat that?
The 6-year plan.
5-year, yeah.
Is supposed to be a guideline for council when they prepare the annual capital budget.
I think that's one purpose that it serves.
Yes.
So I think if we watch the presentation, because we're going to craft you know, as we say, we're crafting it with everybody, and I shouldn't even say we, because I like to give a lot of, all the credit goes to the administration. They work very hard on the capital plan. Tonight is just the presentation of the very, very first draft of the proposed stimulus programming. Perhaps that was a bad analogy I made earlier, but I think if we start with this and just realize we're going to keep molding this, we're crafting this as we go, because we need, it's sort of a give and take.
Well, I think if you provide more opportunities for people to speak, knowing where the COVID money's going, I think it'll all work out fine.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other public comment, we'll get into the presentation. We've already shared a lot of information about it. Firstly, the first slide is some of what we've already discussed, which is a timeline for how we've approached this and why we're here tonight. It was in this room back in March that the stimulus was announced. And at the time, all we knew was we were getting $18 million. And I think everyone's eyes got really big because no one really knew what the strings attached would be and what it was going to be for. But we knew that we had a lot of capital needs because we do have a capital plan. Then April 12th, we had a public input meeting. We started to hear from the public. At the same time, you know, the rules for this money were still coming out. So a lot of the ideas that we heard, some of them could be accommodated, some of them could not be. There was an email address set up as well in April for anyone in the public to email us, give us their questions and concerns, things that they would perhaps like to see. So in July, the municipality got its first $9 million under the American Rescue Plan. That money went into its own fund, its own segregated account. The next $9 million will come next July. That's the way the money was set up because of the way our budget is set up as an entitlement community. They gave Penn Hills half of the money in July, and then the next half will come at that same time next year, which is next July. Between July and August, myself working with the directors, the planning director and the finance director started to put some plans together about, you know, trying to balance a lot of different needs. Certainly our general fund budget and our overall financial health, how does that play in with the stimulus? Tonight is a presentation of the proposed stimulus plan for 21 and 22. It's not the 2022 budget presentation. I'm not making a budget presentation this evening. That comes later. But the stimulus plays into next year's budget. So we have to understand how the stimulus works and what it's going to do in our budget and how it's going to help Penn Hills before we even get into our budget. We are going to be asking the mayor and council next month to amend the 2021 operating budget. There are expenses that the municipality has, expenses and projects that the municipality has undertaken in 2021 that qualify for stimulus funding. So we're going to be asking the mayor and council later this year, next month, to amend our 21 budget so that we can reimburse the municipality for some things. And I'm going to explain what those things are that helps our budget. And I don't want to digress too far.
That's the word I was looking for, reimbursement.
Reimbursement.
Yes.
Correct. We like that word. Our finance director likes that word too. To the extent that we can reimburse Penn Hills for things that we're already paying for, that helps our bottom line. And we could get into that. In November, that is when the municipality is required under the charter to present its 22 budget. So when we present our 22 budget in November, you're going to see a revenue line item for stimulus because the money is going to hit the general fund in some cases. So those all tie together, our capital fund, our sewer fund, and our general operating budget. And none of this, folks, gets approved until December. So the 2022 stimulus and how we spend the stimulus next year doesn't get approved until December when our budget gets approved. Because even though it's stimulus, it's still part of our budget. And we have to have a budget in order to spend it. And the charter requires that we are unable to spend any money, whether it's it has to be part of a budget for us to spend any money. So that's kind of an overall timeline of how things have gone and how we expect them to go through the rest of the year. Very quickly, and I don't want to belabor this because we could spend all night talking about this, and that is what can the stimulus be used for? okay? There's a preamble in the beginning of the final rules that tells us that there's 4 overarching categories of things that you can use the stimulus for. Number 1, to respond to the public health emergency. That was why the money came about in the first place. They allotted $350 billion to local governments all across the United States to respond to the health emergency, to respond to workers that are performing essential work during that emergency, and to provide services, and this is key, to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the prior COVID health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year prior to the emergency. What does that mean? It means that that money could be used to fill a hole in someone's budget. So some local governments, we were not one of them, lost a lot of money during the pandemic. So this money could be used to fill that gap. And fourthly, to make investments in water, sewer, and broadband. Now, that sounds pretty clear. There's 4 major things that we could use the stimulus for. However, if you look at the final rules, it's a 150-page document. So there's a 150-page document that really gets into the weeds, so to speak, on what you can do with the funding. And then in July, the Treasury issued a guidance that came out in July that pretty much added to the list. And we are this month waiting for the final rules on how the money can be spent. We don't expect that when the final rules come out later this month, that they're going to drastically overhaul what's been there already. Some places are already spending their stimulus based on the interim final rules and based on the guidance from the Treasury in July. So we are waiting for the final rules. So we are showing a plan even without the final rules, because we know that this isn't going to get approved until December anyway. But I think the point of it is to put a plan for the public to see and for the mayor and council to see the direction that it's going. Very quickly, I want to explain how the stimulus works. And the mayor alluded to it earlier when she talked about reimbursements, and that's the word that I'll use too. The stimulus funding is in its own pot of money. It's in its own account. From there, the money that's in that fund could really do one of 2 things. It could pay bills directly if they're qualified expenses. So for instance, there's money in the sewer fund. There's money in that stimulus fund, right? And maybe we want to put a sewer line in. Well, that's a qualified expense. Sherry could take money from that stimulus fund and pay for that project directly. That's what is going to happen most of the time. On the other hand, we could also reimburse our other funds if those funds make qualified expenses. So for instance, we could do the same project in the sanitary sewer fund, and the stimulus can reimburse the sewer fund. We could do a qualified project or a qualified expense in the general fund, and the stimulus could reimburse the general fund. So you as a threshold matter, if you want to understand the stimulus and how it operates in our budget, you have to understand that the stimulus can pay bills on its own, or it could also pay funds that have paid bills. I think that's pretty clear, but as we go forward, it's important to keep that in mind, because when we show our budget later in the year, there's going to be a lot of information about, well, why is this money coming in? What is this a reimbursement for? And that's why it's there. So it can reimburse our existing funds, or it could pay bills on its own. So this is what I'm proposing for 2021 for use of funds this year. And we've focused on 3 main areas that we think that we could use stimulus in 2021 in order to make some reimbursements of the general fund, to pay for some sanitary sewer improvements, and also make some stormwater improvements. Very important, and it's been alluded to, all that has to be approved by the mayor and council. There's general fund reimbursements that I'm going to show you in a moment. There's sanitary sewer projects that have been discussed that weren't done in 21 because we didn't have the money, but now we do. We also have stormwater improvements that we want to do all this year, things that we've paid for already or things that we want to pay for by the end of the year. So we know that we could do these things. However, in order to do that, we have to amend our operating budget. And so on September 20th, council is going to see a draft ordinance of what that budget amendment looks like so that they could adopt it hopefully in October and we could make those expenses. So the first category in 2021 that I want to focus on is general fund reimbursements. These are the general fund reimbursements that I'm proposing that we take out of stimulus to reimburse the general fund for in 2021. The first is the senior center staffing, okay? The senior center was closed due to COVID, and those folks were laid off because of the circumstances. We've now called them back to work. Under the stimulus, and by the way, any questions about, well, where does it say that in the stimulus? Where does it say that in the rules? How are you coming up with that? At the very end of the presentation, the very last slide is an index where I will show you exactly where in the final rules we're able to do all of this. I encourage you to look at it. So the first thing is the senior center. We called all those folks back to work and they're on the job right now. Under the rules, we're able to take a reimbursement for their wages because they were called back to work. We're able to do that for the life of the stimulus, although I'm only proposing it for 21 and 22, although you're not going to see that yet. But so for 21, we could pay for those folks. It's alluded to earlier. Last month, we approved a project for the entryway to make it safer because of COVID and other things. That's a $50,000 project. I want to reimburse the general fund for that out of the stimulus. Also, the library staffing. We called back employees to the library because the library was closed for a good part of COVID. So those callbacks and those wages, we can refund the municipality for those costs to the tune of about $63,000. Next is what I'll call the revenue loss formula. Penn Hills was somewhat fortunate in the fact that we didn't experience a big drop off in revenue during the pandemic. And I say during, but it's still happening. And I hope that that continues. Some communities lost revenue, some people because of unemployment, the wage taxes dropped. We really didn't experience that. And even though that's the case, we could still take a revenue loss under the rules. Under the rules, the American Rescue Plan puts forward, I'll say, a somewhat complicated calculation. There's a calculation that we're able to do in 21 that we could take stimulus to help our budget. I'm going to rely on Sherry for anybody that has questions on that. In the notes, you could read about the calculation. It's a 10-page, literally, calculation as to how you come up with that number. So for 21, we can reimburse the general fund with $400,000 of stimulus money as lost revenue. And that's what I'm calling it, but it's really, you can take it even if you didn't lose revenues. Am I right? The next is we are able to reimburse the municipality for the cost and benefits of part of our EMS department. The EMS department, because of the fact that it's directly related to public health, we're saying that 25% of the wages and benefits of the medical department that we should claim a reimbursement for. We're able to do that under the rules. Again, at the end, I will show you where all of that is laid out. So for us, in 2021, if we were to reimburse the municipality for 25% of wages and benefits, it's about $425,000. Lastly, in 2021, we are going to complete a water line replacement project on Kilvington Road. It's been discussed. It's a road in Penn Hills that really is going to be very soon without water. And when that happens, we're going to have a lot more, we're going to have more houses to add on to our demolition list, quite frankly. So that's a project that we never had the money to do it. The residents didn't have the money to do it. They are kicking in some money. So this year, we are going to make sure that those folks have clean drinking water. So those 6 items comprise the general fund reimbursements that we'd like to take later on this year.
Scott, before you move on, can I say one thing? So for example, the senior center staffing reimbursement, it's almost $250,000. That's an outlay that we would have to take from the general fund. So in my mind, it's like we just found $250,000.
That's right.
So we're sort of adding that to the budget. If we add all these 6 items up, it's like $1.2 million. To me, that's where we have the found money, because we would have to take that out of the general fund. And so we just found over $1 million.
And I don't want to
Through
digress.
reimbursement.
I want to touch on what you said, and I don't want to digress too far because I do want to try to get through this. You have to understand that we do have an underlying financial problem in Penn Hills. It was discussed. Then when we got the stimulus, it kind of went away, but it really didn't. We know that we have a declining fund balance. So to the extent that we could use the stimulus to pay for existing obligations, it helps our fund balance, because it means that we don't have to reach into the general fund or future taxpayers to pay for those things. So anytime we could try to take reimbursements that make sense, that are appropriate under the rules, that's what we like to do. So those are in 2021 now, just remember, this is just 21. In 21, we're showing that these would be the general fund reimbursements that we would want to take. Moving on. There are projects in 2021 that the sewer department wants to complete that they didn't have the money to complete, quite frankly. So whenever this money came about, they came back and said, if we had the money to do these things in 21, we really would like to add them to the list. So this is the list of quote unquote add-ons that other than the methane project. The methane project was already going ahead on its own. Jennifer, she's back there. But that's something that we can reimburse the sanitary sewer fund for that. The other things, the repair contract, these are things that were delayed for a long time. They want to do these things this year if they can. So in 2021, we're going to be asking the mayor and council to also amend our budget to allow stimulus to pay for the things that you see up here on this list, okay? Also, stormwater is included. We all know that that's a really big topic. Again, we already did Southern Avenue in 2021. We heard a lot about that. We could reimburse the stormwater fund for that. We have a separate stormwater fund that paid for that. So we can use stimulus to reimburse the stormwater fund. And also, Mr. Shepherd, these are 3 projects that you would like to do this year, correct? These are 3 critical projects that we didn't have the money to do in 21, but now we do. So we're also going to be seeking that budget amendment to allow us to do this to the tune of $300,000. Those comprise the 2021 projects. So that's just 21. So for 21, we're showing general fund reimbursements. We're showing sanitary sewer work that we otherwise couldn't complete, along with stormwater projects as well. Then we go into 22. And as I said, just to preface this, again, just like the projects I showed just a few moments ago, those are not definite until the mayor and council amend the budget. Hopefully they do that. We want them to do that. I hope they do that. I know that the directors want them to do that. They could do that in October. When that happens, then those things will happen. What I'm about to show you is what we intend to use the stimulus for in 22. Again, it's not official until our budget's adopted, and historically, that doesn't happen until sometimes the last day of the year. We're working on maybe changing that calendar a little bit, but usually our budget doesn't get adopted until the end of the year. So there's literally between now and the end of the year to make changes and to hear from folks as to what they would like to see. These are the areas that we've focused on for 2022 for how we would like to expend stimulus funds. Some of them are familiar: stormwater and sewers. Imagine that. You just saw those. Stormwater, sewers, general fund reimbursements. Well, those are we just showed you those for 21. We're going to continue to do those in 22. The new things that we were proposing in 22 that we would want to do is we want to help the first responders, and I'm going to tell you in a minute what I mean by that and how that might look. We also can do some parks and recreation improvements with stimulus that we didn't know that we could do originally. But the Treasury Department on July 19th came out with some new rules that said you can do outdoor recreation with the stimulus. stimulus. They didn't tell us that in the beginning, but they came out in July and said that you can do outdoor recreation. Also, improvements to some of our facilities as well. I'm including facilities improvements with the recreation just because I didn't have anywhere to put it. And then lastly, community and nonprofit organizations can benefit as well. The first topic, the first slide for 22 would be first responders, okay? I'm proposing in 2022 that we add an additional 4 police officers. And we take our roster from 53 to 57. That's a proposal. Under the rules, under the FAQs that the Treasury came out with, you can hire law enforcement to pre-pandemic levels. That's what the rules say. So I'm suggesting that when we do our budget, that we add policemen to it. The benefit of that will be that we can answer more calls. That's the budget request that we get every year. The police department always is seeking more officers. We never have the budget to do it. The theory would be that it might lower overtime if we have additional officers. So that's one part of the proposal. In addition, now there's a caveat because there's an asterisk next to it. It's not stimulus funded. I'm also proposing that we make a one-time cash donation to our 6 volunteer fire departments. We all know that they need funding, and we've had many discussions with them in this room. So my proposal would be to continue to make the annual allotment that we always make them, but give them each $50,000. That does not come directly from stimulus. However, that does come from our general fund, but we would only be able to do it because of the fact that we're taking some other reimbursements that would give us the money to do it. In addition, we're also, as I showed you earlier, going to be reimbursing the general fund for part of the EMS wages, 25%. All those reimbursements, well, where do they go? Well, they don't just pile up and add to our general fund balance. They go out on other things like new ambulance purchases. We're not able to use the stimulus to buy an ambulance. We're not able to use the stimulus to buy a police car. But when we free up money in the general fund with those reimbursements, it gives us the ability to pay for those things. In addition, we've heard about it before. It would also give us the ability to add some more code enforcement next year. It's a little premature to know what that means because I don't want to get into the 2022 budget right now. That's not what this is. But this is just trying to show us and show the public that with the stimulus funding, the plan would be, as it relates to first responders, to add additional policemen to the roster, 4 additional, and also to increase the cash that we give to our volunteer fire departments as well. And we would also be taking next year that same reimbursement for wages allows us to pay for ambulances. And again, we just saw this for 21. We just saw a few minutes ago the things that we want to reimburse the municipality for in the general fund. Some of them are familiar. The senior center staffing, there it is again. We're able to do that. We're able to do that for every year of the stimulus. Until now, in December 31st, 2025, we can use stimulus to pay for the people that we've called back to the center to work. Now that's a longer period of time than 21 because all the money has to be from March 21 onward. It can't be from anything that you spent in January or February. It's only March onward. So again, for next year, I'm proposing that we would reimburse the general fund for the senior staffing. Also, there it is again, that revenue loss formula. In 2021, we showed it as 400. Sherry tells me that it's probably going to maybe be 350 for next year. Why? It's the formula. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to explain that formula. So it's another basically 400,000 next year. EMS wages reimbursement. The rules say that you can pay for the wages and benefits of folks that are engaged with COVID response. We think that it's fair to say the 25% of what they do in that department, and they do it very well, is because of COVID, because of the calls that they're going on. Also, police wages reimbursement, because I just showed you that we want to add policemen next year. Well, that could be paid for through the stimulus. The stimulus rules say that you could hire law enforcement officers with stimulus. That's also. And this is one that's kind of interesting too. Our library shifted to a nonprofit a little earlier this year. So as we sit here today, our library is a nonprofit. The stimulus rules on page 34 of the interim rules, you could read it if you want to. You can help a nonprofit that is experiencing closures, layoffs, and mitigate COVID effects with stimulus. Our library closed last year. It closed because of it closed because of COVID. We next year are expecting to make a $500,000 contribution to our library, okay? Because every year the library costs money, whether we pay it directly or whether it's a donation. I'm proposing that we reimburse the general fund for part of what the library donation will be, because the rules allow us to do it. Part of the library being a nonprofit was that we thought it might maybe free up some creative ways of funding it. This is one of those creative ways. Because the library is a nonprofit, as we sit here, because of the fact that it experienced negative COVID impacts and had to close, in order to keep the library open, so to speak, I'm proposing that we use stimulus to pay our share of it. That, once again, helps the general fund. These are all general fund reimbursements. So when you would add those up, all of those things except for the police wages, because that would be a new expense, would be things that would just be adding on to the general fund. Stormwater next year. I know some of this stuff isn't that exciting, but again, the money's heavy source. I mean, that's the thing. When you read through these rules, it's really heavy on source. These are the projects that Mr. Shepard and Mr. Minsterman have come up with that they would like to do next year, storm sewer wise. And there's a little bit of a description as to what they are. If you had more questions, if anybody wanted to know more about what these projects are, you could talk to Mr. Shepard, or you can get in touch with us. But I think this, Scott, if I'm not mistaken, I put you on the spot, but if we were to do this, this would take us pretty far into completing, I think, what we need to do.
I gave you everything outstanding. And that's this list that we cannot repair in-house.
So if we did these jobs next year, we would be
Caught up for that?
okay. But there's more. There's still more that could be done.
Yes.
Okay. So that would be one area where the stimulus could just pay for these projects, or they could reimburse the stormwater fund. It just depends. And then lastly, this is a biggie. This is the, and I'm not picking on our director. I'm not picking on the sewer department. It's just, it's an expensive department and they have a lot of needs, and we talk about it all the time. It's just the way it is. Okay. There's no getting around it. These are the projects that the sewer department would like to do next year. Okay. And there's a whole lot of stuff on that list. And I apologize if you can't really read it all. I'm trying to get it on one screen for you. But when you total all those projects up, it comes up to $10 million. Okay. And we're not going to do $10 million next year. I mean, it's an $18 million stimulus, and between what we've already shown and this, that would be pretty much the end of the stimulus. But we want to try to do as much as we can do. And what I'm proposing next year, and that's really small, I apologize, but to get everything on one screen, that's as good as I could get it. As I said, all their requests next year come up to $10 million. I'm proposing that we apply $3 million of stimulus to some of those projects. That's a proposal. I think it's important to show everyone in this room that's listening at home that we could, if we wanted to, we could spend the entire stimulus just on sanitary sewer projects, and we would probably still need more money. It isn't because of anything, it's just the way it is. They're expensive operations and there's a lot of repairs. All of these are very worthwhile projects. Everything on that $10 million is stuff that we really need to do, but even with $18 million, we still can't do all of it. So I'm proposing $3 million next year. And also, you have to keep in mind, this is just 22. the funding doesn't have to be expended until 2025. So you still have a few more years in here beyond 22. Again, this is all part of next year's budget and it's subject to change. Next, parks and recreations and facilities. In July, the Treasury issued FAQs that said, because of the pandemic, you can use stimulus for outdoor recreation. That's related to COVID. I don't know if it's totally logical how the rules are written, but as of now, the Treasury says that you can use stimulus for outdoor recreation. This is a list of things that we would like to do next year with stimulus, and it all has to tie to outdoor recreation, except the last item, and I'll get to that. We want to replace all of the pavilions at Universal Park. We also want to install a splash park. We don't know where yet, but John Scaglione and I talked about that with our Public Works Director. There's been a plan that's kind of been kicked around. They think that we could do that for $250. Don't know where it would be yet. I think that's an exciting project that you may welcome. I know it's been discussed before. Penn Hills Park Playground, $85,000 to replace what was destroyed in 2020. In addition, I'm proposing money that we put into what I'll call community playgrounds. There's playgrounds at locations, some of which are used, but they're not always owned by the municipality. There's a playground at McKinley Center. There's a playground at the Multipurpose Center. There's folks that are trying to raise money for a playground in Rosedale right now. And also there's a playground in Crescent Hills Park too. So to the extent that we can inject cash and make improvements into all those community playgrounds, I would like to do it. The dog park is on there, new fencing. Penn Hills Skate Park renovation, new surfacing and fencing. Replacing all the picnic tables is on there as well. If you wanted more information on all these projects, our recreation director would be the one to help you with that. And I would certainly encourage you to talk to him. In addition, just as we did with this building, because we had to react to COVID, we had to change glass, we had to cut holes in the wall and all this stuff. Just as we did here, I'm also proposing that we make improvements to the entrances at both the McKinley Center and the Senior Center. And that's actually, I think we had the engineer already looking at that. We're already putting that together. That's something that we have to do. That's a must. So we're hoping to have a more secure entry at the Senior Center and a more secure entry at the McKinley Center as well as part of this. That would be the recreation piece as well as the facility improvement. We're doing improvements on this building very soon that we'll hopefully be able to reimburse ourselves with, assuming that the budget gets amended. Lastly, I'm proposing that we set aside $500,000 in 22 for community and nonprofit organizations. Now, we could have a lot of discussion on how to access that. What does it mean? When I read the rules, and I've read them a lot, if you're a nonprofit that is directly engaged in offsetting or responding to COVID, you can get money. That's my read of it. What does it mean? It could. We did get a proposal from the CDC. We've gotten a proposal from the CDC. They want to do some things in the community that are COVID related. Potentially, they would be able to access some of those funds. Who else? Food banks, utility assistance for nonprofits. Just as I alluded to, the library is a nonprofit. It experienced hardships because of COVID. We're able to fund them through stimulus. We could do that with other nonprofits in the community. So this money would be set aside to help with those endeavors. But as I said, as we're here right now, the only proposal that we have is from the CDC. So I'm proposing that they would be able to access some of that. Okay. And what does this all look like after we spend $18 million? What's left? This is what's left. This is what it looks like. Okay. We're proposing, if you add up what we showed you in 21, that's about 12% of the stimulus. The reimbursements, the SOAR fund, the sanitary SOAR projects, and the storm funds, those three things that's going to eat up about 12% of that stimulus. In 22, if everything that I just showed you happened, that would eat up about 45% of it. And we would still be left with a little less than half of the stimulus between 22 and 24. So that's it. That's what I got for you. So the intent of this was to lay out as simply as I could the way the stimulus works. How does it feed our other funds? What could it pay for? What might it pay for? And then to hear from mayor and council. And as I said, I do not expect the mayor and council this evening. This is a lot. This is a lot to go through. There's a lot here. I mean, we're hearing about a lot of projects for the first time and a lot of things for the first time. They certainly need some time to think about it and be thorough and thoughtful. And I would encourage you to stay involved. I would encourage you to look at this. It's going to be online. It's going to be recorded if you want to watch it again. We're also here every day. You have a question, you can ask us. We want the public involvement. We want the public to support what we're doing because this is your money and you should know where it's going and what it's funding. But I will say before I close, it's very easy to point to a project and say, well, you could fund that with stimulus. But you got to find out how to do it. And that's a critical part of it. This last slide keys everything that I've shown you as to how it would be done. You know, for instance, the EMS wage reimbursements. Well, how are you doing that? It's right in the Treasury FAQs. There's the links, you could read it, because there's a lot of folks that have really good ideas, but those ideas aren't in the rules. And so sometimes you'll hear an idea that it's like you have to make an inference and you end up with this kind of a Rube Goldberg plan as to how to spend a stimulus. And I don't think it's supposed to be that way. I think it's supposed to be pretty straightforward. As time went on and as the staff talked about it, we found out that there was more flexibility in the rules than we thought at first. And we had to be creative. That's, I think, the key to it, is trying to be creative somewhat. That's where we came up with some of these things. So that's all I have to say. That's the proposal. Again, the only thing that mayor and council are being asked to consider sort of immediately would be whether we want to amend our budget next month to allow, because we haven't spent any stimulus. We all have ideas for what it wants to be spent on, but we haven't spent a quarter of it because we can't. We cannot spend anything outside of a budget and outside of the budget being amended for 21. Okay, so any questions, you can email them to me. So that's what I got.
I have a few comments, if I may.
Go ahead, Councilman Getzey.
I spent the better part of, excuse me, can you hear okay here? I spent the better part of today reading the stimulus regulations. I put on my iPad, Federal Register, stimulus grant for entitlement communities, and I got the whole regulation thing. Excuse me, I spent 40 years looking at federal grants of different types, and this is the most wide open event covering complicated regulations I have ever seen. Because while they spell out some of the things you can do, some of it's vague, and I know our regulations that we had were pretty specific, and they still had questions. So there are so many questions in this that we could fill a lot of paper just with the questions. Now, I'm going to recommend that in future meetings, when we discuss anything, we put the reference in the regulations in there so that you could look at that section and say, yeah, well, let's see what that is. Okay, I can't see that. All right, I see it. Yeah, I saw that. Okay. But the reference should be there so you know what part of the regulations to look at. I also recommend that you all or some of you get together and little study groups and look at these regulations and come up with questions, instead of individually, come up with a committee question or explanation of the different regulations. Because I think if everybody looks at that and comes up with their own questions, it's going to take a lot of time to go through all this. But I suggest you do little committees, maybe meet twice a month, go over specific sections of this and raise questions. We talked about some of the budgets here and reimbursing previous costs. A large part of the regulations deal with mitigating the damage done to, excuse me, low and moderate income persons through housing and other ways of doing it. It includes medical services. It is so comprehensive in nature that you think there's a lot here. And it's a major reason that this grant has been proposed to mitigate the damage done to people who have been damaged through one way or another, housing, employment, and that has to be weighed against some of this. And looking at what's proposed here, the number of projects we have, everything that we want and need in any section of the regulations is not going to be satisfied fully, but you're going to have to, I think, identify those people who would benefit most, like low and moderate elderly would be a group, because you're not going to be able to get to everybody. So, and somewhere along the line, I would like to see if you could develop what I would call straight line budget projections, taking us through the years of the stimulus years, previous and maybe a year beyond, to see what the total budget picture is with stimulus money, capital improvements money, regularly budgeted items, and what each year is going to end up looking like. I don't know if I explained this well, but if you have a year's worth of expenses, you can probably make a straight line projection of what you've had and what you can anticipate. But with this stimulus money, with the possibility of it being somehow, I don't like to say intermingled, because I think it should be tracked separately. It could be tracked separately for the same kinds of projects, but that's, we can get into later. But I think you need to look at what is the issues that you want to be addressed? What are the funding needs that we have in accordance with what the stimulus projects that it's going to do? So with that, I'm going to say good luck. I spent a good part of the day looking at it, and I'd break it up into increments, like only 4 hours a day, maybe for a week. I was facetious.
Thank you, Councilman Getzey. We typically go with the deputy mayor and then alphabetically. So Deputy Mayor, do you have any question or comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. I just want everyone to keep in mind that the requirements, these specs, may very well change as we go through the process of spending in projects. So it may become more allowable, for projects. These are just preliminary. This is just a preliminary foundation that's been laid. And I can guarantee you that the regulations are going to change. They are, because as you can already see, COVID's already changed. So I just want you to keep in mind that, it will become more allowable for some projects that are not yet approved. Also, the stipulations, they're just not final. Again, this is really just preliminary foundation that has been laid, right? This is all new, and they just had to give us some type of preliminary foundation.
A framework.
Yeah,
We
a
feel,
framework.
yeah, we feel that this is a framework for whatever is going to be finalized in December. And I do agree with the Deputy Mayor. The final rules aren't done yet. They're supposed to be coming in the next 2 weeks. And from what we've seen, I don't make any prediction. I think that if they did anything, they would give us more flexibility, though.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, I was sitting here thinking, keep in mind that there are no stipulations in place for the interest on this $18 million, right? So, I mean, there's some more money for us,
Yes.
right? I mean,
Yep.
interest on $18 million, that's pretty nice. So there's nothing laid out for the interest at this point in time. And we hope that they don't put anything in place for that interest, right?
That's true.
So I just want you to keep that in mind as well.
It's in an interest bearing account.
So I hope we have it in a good account.
Yep.
Okay.
Councilman Pecora, do you have any questions or comments?
I'd just like to say that it's a good framework for the stimulus money, but it's not etched in stone. I'd just like to let the public know that there'll be changes down the road, I'm sure. And I agree with the deputy mayor that there'll be more hopeful, better regulations for us from the federal government. That's all I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Petrucci, any questions or comments?
I just want to thank the manager and the directors for all their hard work in putting this together. It's very interesting and there's a lot of material there to digest. Of course, I echo the same sentiments as Councilman Pecora and Deputy Mayor Sapp, that hopefully that, at some point it will be more flexible. And let's just see how this plays out. That's all we can do. Thank you.
I have one comment and two questions. I would like to say that the way I see it is the only difference between those of us sitting up here and you sitting out there is that we have this bar between us. We can't stress enough how much input we want from you. So my first question is, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, I don't necessarily expect an answer, but do I understand you to mean, so for example, Mr. Shepherd, if we need, or I'm sorry, maybe, if we need $10 million worth of sewer work done, if we were to do 3 million from the stimulus money, could we not then reimburse ourselves from the sewer fund? I'm sorry, I didn't see you back there. Could we, and I don't expect you to know the answer to this, I'm just saying, I'm putting this out there. Could we not do 3 million this year, reimburse ourselves 3 million, which gives us 6 million, and then do another 3 million next year and reimburse ourselves 3 million from the sewer fund? So I'm looking at it as if we've got 12 million. If that's a wrong way to look at that, I get it, but that's kind of the way I'm looking at this right now.
If I follow what you're saying, like she has 10 million, she has $10 million worth of need.
Right.
So we could do, you could do 10 all at once if you wanted to, or you could do, like I'm proposing, 3 million next year. We don't see 23, like we have to spend the stimulus, I think by 25.
But if we spend 3 million, don't we get to reimburse ourselves 3 million?
It depends. If we spend it directly out of stimulus on a project, then we don't reimburse.
Okay, I see.
If she spends it out of existing sewer funds, then we reimburse. So for instance.
I get it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I get it.
No, it could be complicated.
So my second question is, when we reimburse ourselves for example, for EMS salaries.
Yep.
That's a reimbursement. But when you talk about adding 4 more police officers.
That's a new expense.
That's a new expense. So just to sort of think out loud or to play devil's advocate, if I'm a police officer and I'm applying for a job, I know that you can pay me for 1 year, maybe 2. Unless I'm just looking for experience, why would I come here? And I don't expect you to answer that. I'm just saying that's sort of a rhetorical question. If we can't really budget for 4 more officers till retirement, maybe there is some young officer that says, hey, I'll go and work there for 2 years. But otherwise, aren't we really saying you've got a job for a year or 2, but it's not going to be long term?
I think that's a real consideration. People deal with that with the COPS grants. I think to the mayor's point, if we were to add additional staffing with the stimulus, the question becomes, how do you pay for those individuals at the end of 4 years when that stimulus goes away? And the answer to that question would be you, A, find a way to pay for those folks, whatever that may mean, or within the next 4 years, because our department's pretty big, you're going to have retirements and you're going to have things, and that by the end of the 4 years, you would end up back at 53. So
Right.
if you were to add any staff into our budget, whether it's policemen or whether it's public works or whether it's whomever, there would have to be some thought put into, at the end of the 4 years, are you going to be able to afford to keep those individuals? Or are you going to be scaled back to where you started because as people retire, you just don't replace? So there would be a safety mechanism for the municipality that we wouldn't be obligated to stay at 57 at the end of the stimulus.
I know I know that the manager has offered you to email questions or comments, but I think it's only fair to, if you have any question or comment now, I think it's only fair if you could just briefly do that, because we're going to have many more meetings. But if there's anything you'd like to ask or comment on now, I think you should be given the opportunity to speak.
Hi, Susan Chikala, 59 Hathaway Court. Thank you for all this work you've put into this. It's obviously very elaborate and complicated. So I was excited about the stimulus when I found out about it, thinking that we could have some bragging rights for Penn Hills and make it something spectacular instead of just putting into boring things like ambulances and sewage. So what would be the chance, now that the library is nonprofit, to look at that amphitheater that they had originally put in that library plan? And then secondly, what about a bike trail or something like that under the park and recreation aspect of that? Any chance of those kind of things that could really provide new people to come into Penn Hills to say, wow, Penn Hills is a great place to live. I want to be here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. The amphitheater project, as I understand it, it was designed originally when the library was constructed, but it was not built. We had some discussion about that. Under the rules, it probably would qualify for outdoor recreation. However, what I wanted to say is the library right now is going through a process with a consultant architect to come back with sort of a reimagining of what the space could be. What do we want the future of the library to be? What changes could be made internally to the space itself? And I think part of that study, when it is completed, is going to make recommendations on any need for outdoor space. So I think that it's an attractive idea and it's an interesting one to look at, but I'm not proposing it for 22 only because of the fact that they're still in the middle of a study, and that study might come back and say, hey, this is something that the municipality should look at building. So it is something that could probably happen with the money. It's just that right now they're still in a process, and I forget the architect's name that is doing that. It escapes me, but they've had stakeholder interviews and so forth. So that's going to come out. And when that does, it might lead into, if not this money, it could be a potential future state grant through DCNR possibly, or something like that. But it could fund it. Yeah.
So given the fact that this money is here and now, would there be any way to go through the process of this evaluation at this time rather than waiting for the money to not be here? Would that study be able to be done now instead of later?
I know they're in the process of it. They're in the process of doing a study that sort of rethinks the whole space, and that that would be included with it, but it's not completed yet.
How can we push them along? And then as far as a bike trail, any talk about that? That's for
that would be
Parks and
that would be
Recreation.
Mr. Blackwell's bailiwick, I think.
Mr. Chikala, if you, I'm not sure if you've been or heard from the last couple of meetings where we did have some really positive outcomes for the trail near Milltown Park. So we've acquired property, or we're in the process of acquiring property, about a mile of trail in the vicinity of Milltown Park, which is part of the, currently right now it's the VOP Trail, which is the Verona, Oakmont, Penn Hills, and Plum Trail, which would go from Allegheny River to Boyce Park. I don't have it in the capital program at this time. I think it's I think it's further off than that. And I'm not sure, I think if you see I'm very excited about a trail, and I would agree with you that that's what we need, right? But I think that when you see the list of things that the Parks Director put forth, there's a considerable amount of projects there that he has outlined that he would like to see the money go for. And I think if you didn't notice that, you think, oh, picnic tables, doesn't sound very exciting. But if you look at the cost, it's $75,000. What's happened is, I think as the manager said earlier, is that there are things that we need to pay for that we can't pay for. And if you go to, and then you put together a capital program where you have these ideas and this money comes along. And so although there's maybe some, what you might say, more exciting things that would make you want to move here, I think also that Penn Hills is a great place. I always feel, and I know you feel the same way. But I think also you might go to parks and you think, man, these tables are really these are really in bad shape. And so he's looking at those kind of things. And you see that the cost is $75,000. So I think the manager just put that up again. So I don't have a cost for the trail, but I totally agree with you. We've been, the spot committee that I'm on has been working diligently. We're moving ahead, moving forward to work on this trail. We are looking at the section 1, which is in Verona. And then these things came along where we started to acquire property. So now we have right of way. So now we'll start looking how to fund that trail. And I'm very excited about that. But I think that when you look at the list of things that John Scaglione has put together, those are the things that we're talking about funding. And I think there's some exciting things up there, actually. And then some of the things up there, even, and maybe that's what Mr. Davidson was talking about, where, they have the splash pad, and in part of the capital program, the cost is, we have a DCNR grant out right now, and the project cost is, say, $400,000. So then up in the funding, we have $200,000, and that would be the DCNR grant. Mayor and council would have to decide on the match, the other 200,000. But so when you look up in here, like a splash pad, things like that, these are things that have been on the director's list for many, many years. He's wanted to do these things. And he's come to me and said, Chris, can you help me with this grant? And I'm like, it's just, they want accessibility. They want these other, there's even grant providers have their requirements and things that they are after. DCNR really looks for accessibility. So those Universal Park Pavilion replacement, those are all going to be accessible pavilions. They're going to have ramps to them and things. So I totally agree with you. I know I'm talking excessively long, but I think that you look at what the parks director, each department had talked to the manager, and we sat down and we discussed the things that they need. And that's where, that's what the stimulus, I think, will go to.
Makes sense. Okay.
Thank you
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
With their, oh,
I'm still hoping for garbage cans and people to empty them. And maybe, that's not for this budget. I'll bring it up again in December that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first sentence.
But like garbage cans
garbage
and budgets to, like a budget for people to empty them. We do have volunteers that have maintained garbage cans. And some of those people said it's just become too much for them. It's a big ask. So I just want to bring that up. I want to say I support code. I and many others have talked about this for a number of years, even if it is just for a year or for a couple of years. I know that's not ideal for a job, but I think if people can see that code is cracking down and getting serious and it helps cleans up Penn Hills, it kind of sets you in a good direction. And then lastly, I just want to say, speaking of cleaning, the Penn Hills Anti-Litter Group, Penn Hills is a team. We will be competing in the Garbage Olympics this Saturday from 9 to 11. If you would like to join us, we will be meeting at the Penn Hills, the Giant Eagle on the corner of Frankstown and Verona. And we will be vying for our third most team spirit. Look for our video later tomorrow on the Penn Hills Anti-Litter Group YouTube channel. It's a doozy, but we would love to have people out there. These are volunteers. They come out maybe 6 Saturdays a year. So please support us. Please support that end of Penn Hills. We'll be doing Verona, parts of Frankstown, Grand Boulevard Extension. The more people that volunteer, the more we can do. If we only get a dozen people, we'll be limited. So thank you.
I just do want to remind everybody that we did post, I believe it was 4 positions.
Yeah, we did, Mayor. We, at the beginning of the year, we put together a plan for a paid litter pickup. We just didn't get anybody to apply for the positions.
0, paid position.
But in terms of some of the things that are on the list, and I know we had a meeting about it, some of those things are coming. And what I can say is, when you see that R word, we like the reimbursement word, that frees up funding to do things. One of which would maybe be get more garbage cans and possibly add the staffing, to do a better job at that. So to the extent that we help the general fund, it helps some of those what you would consider to be, some of those projects. And by the way, that's not an exhaustive list of all nonprofits. It's just that we only got one proposal from a community nonprofit, but that funding could be accessed by other groups as well.
So with there being no further public comment or questions, I would really, really like to thank everybody, all the departments. Thank you so much. So much work went into this. And remember that you can email or certainly talk to any of us about it. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone, and this meeting is adjourned.